Hello, everybody. Happy week 2. You are catching me after a very long weekend, so forgive the sleep-deprived self. Funny under the context of readings this week, but I'm going to go ahead with my discussion post for week 2. So which segments this week's reading have been most significant to you? And it will probably be no surprise that sort of the neurological stress is, up there on my list, not just because of what I do, but has a lot to do with sort of, I think, the overall impact that basically the demands of our lives and stress can have over us. So I am sticking to some notes, but boy, I kind of have a lot to say apparently this week, so I'll try not to nerd out too much on you guys. Yes, so I am passionate, obviously, about neurology. I think that I ended up in sort of this happenstance field, but find a lot of interest with sort of our cognitive abilities and what we're capable of underneath circumstances of injury, as well as sort of with high emphasis and the passion for me comes within the neurodevelopmental and kids piece. I work with everything from neonates to adults under some diagnostic testing. I'm actually inside my lovely work office where I do autonomic testing, which most of what we're reading is really applicable to kind of my day-to-day and what I do. But yeah, I think that, all of our context affects stress that we've covered this week, but it really comes back to how they affect our senses, our perception, and our cognition as the underlying sort of component. And so sticking to my notes without going too much off course, why do I think this topic is important? Well, I think, our bodies brain's ability to deal with and process sort of the daily exposures that we take in. We're constantly learning, we're constantly evolving, we're constantly required to tap into resources we have or don't have. And a lot of things are learned, whether they're inherently learned, whether they're academically sought after. And so I think our perceptions often are really complex, right? I do a lot of diagnostic testing on autoimmune responses, and so I found this week's reading really interested because we know that sort of these chemicals affect our brain. I work a lot with acetylcholine, I work a lot with corticosteroids, and basically I assess heart rate and blood pressure function and the brain's responsibility in that process. So stress plays a drastic role towards the ability to regulate our emotions and our reactions. And we see that, I see that every day, all day long. I think I see it from all ends of the spectrum. So when I'm asked the third question, apply, sort of where you might use this bit of information in the everyday world, I think I have to tap into sort of the mental rationale, which is that in a health crisis or someone who doesn't feel good, they come from a place of the inability to sort of logically or emotionally or regulatorily express sort of how they're feeling from a more positive outlook. So my job can be super, super stressful because obviously impact to the brain affects, your ability to sort of reconcile and regulate in a lot of ways. So yeah, I mean, I work with all ends of the spectrum as far as, from seizures and epilepsy secondary to trauma, but also as a primary diagnosis. And I work with a lot of psychogenic comorbidities, which there's a huge overlap, but these are like underlying traumatic experiences or traumas that manifest in a way that's similar to epilepsy. And I think they're very fascinating, but it does show you where that wiring of the brain can get so off, much like we're reading this week. So, Yeah, I like the topic this week. Obviously, it's up my alley. I do think that neurologically, our chemicals and our exposures, even as we read like in, neonatal exposures, play a role into how we deal with things. And I think a lot of it is sometimes outside of our control, which is terrifying to me. But as is the field I work in, where, sometimes people don't ask for these traumas or ask for, the secondary causation of seizures, and then they have to, reinvent the wheel or relearn a lot of things. And the impact that these injuries can have on your brain is significant. And a lot of my passions, aside from developmental disability, comes into where I can help, these patients with sort of a new revised plan for how to deal with their new disability. And so, the brain is super cool, super fascinating. I do sometimes these really repetitive things, and I'm often reminded, though, that every situation is so complex in how it works and how it breaks down. And what I know and what I absorb and what I sort of have been trained is far more extensive than sometimes what I do as a neurodiagnostic technologist. So say that 3 times fast over dinner and have people look at you and go, huh? Yeah, that's my world. But I see, lots of instances, as early on as experiences that babies have in the NICU, and then, follow them, through their early developmental years. Especially now, having been here 10 years, I have a lot of patients that sort of, come back, and I see sort of the progression of what their life looks like. And so the brain is a huge sort of influencer. And what I also find fascinating about the brain and think is really important to sort of mention is that the brain can neuronally rewire itself, sometimes negatively, but also sometimes positively. As you know, I have a son with some pretty gnarly epilepsy. Crazy, because I ended up in this field before having my son, but I do think the universe has aligned me with where I need to be in order to sort of better care for him. But it's allowed me to be really creative about how to care for his needs or how to think outside of the box. And it's pretty fascinating. My son seizes 3 to 10 seconds of every minute of every day. So I'll let you do the math. And that's just while he's awake. It's worse when he sleeps. But he still is resilient. He still has a capacity to learn. It is just very different than you and I. And so a lot of that creative passion for me comes from there. The third question of in what ways would I apply, this information to daily living? I will say the overlap of, your neuronal exposure, your health, your cardiovascular system, your immunity, all those things, they're affected by sleep. And it's terrifying for me because this weekend, for instance, I worked 120 hours straight with maybe a nap here and there around direct patient care. And so what is that doing to me long term? I really start to ask myself that. But I try to balance the stress of my job with sort of the resilience that I see in people who are successful at the other side of the coin, especially when it comes to kids and working with their families. I love to pour that energy in. So this is over the time limit. I don't know how to get it to be less, but I hope you all have a good week. I did do the reading. I had a cancellation today, which was lovely. I got to get through all my reading at work. And so as you can see, I'm still wearing my name tag and my work garb. Hopefully I'll get to go home at some point in time this week, but I hope you all have a great week, and we'll talk soon. Thanks.